Well, for those of you who are joining us, welcome to our first of what will hopefully be many Beyond Education webinars. We're excited to launch this new tool and share, according to the title, what we learned in the 2025 application cycle. So there were quite a few changes, updates, evolutions, nuances that the senior class experienced. And as we look to rising seniors and juniors, sophomore, and freshmen, we want to make sure that you are informed about how to maybe shift your perspective and expectations on the college advising process. So without further ado, we are going to jump in. Okay, so in today's talk, we are going to cover a couple things. So one, we're going to talk through the numbers, right? And actually look at some of the admission statistics from really the last 15 years to show you how the things have changed by the numbers, right? According to the numbers. We're also going to look at what that means for the 2026 application cycle. So for these soon-to-be seniors who are finishing out their school year this week or in the coming weeks, how that might change how they approach the college application process. And then we also want to share with you our 4 key areas that we've identified for assembling your best college application, right? Using the statistics, the numbers, and the anecdotal evidence from this last year. And then if there's any questions, we're going to open it up to a little bit of Q&A at the end. So you're welcome to put questions in the Q&A, use that button at any time, but we will not be answering those questions until the end. Okay, so a little bit of history, because again, this is our first webinar, so we just wanted to give a brief timeline of how we got here. So I am Laura Ellis. I started Beyond Education a few years ago, but long before that, in 2008, when I was still in college, I started tutoring students as a little side venture, as a side hustle, as the cool kids might call it. From there, I worked for another tutoring company until in 2018, actually launching Beyond Education. And we support students through college application and advising, as well as K through 12 tutoring and test prep, and even homeschool students. And that has just continued to grow over the last 7 years to the point that as quickly as in 2 years, we had 10 tutors, advisors, and support professionals, and that's grown, all the way up to 30. And then our most recent evolution point has been this past February in 2025. We actually were acquired by a fellow education company called AIM Educate. And so that's really expanded our team and our ability to grow and support students, not just in college advising, but all of our services. And that is where I get to introduce our 2 new college advising team members, Lisa Farrell and Julia Ogden, both of whom you're going to hear from in just a bit during this webinar. So we're really excited about how the college advising team is growing and just the ability to serve students and what we're able to do even with this year's juniors and all the students who are coming up through our program. So. Okay, so one thing that we wanted to acknowledge just right off the bat is that even though we're going to be focusing on students who are interested in the 4-year bachelor's degree, commonly what you think of as university and college programs, there are many paths to finding a student's career, right? And whatever they may define as success. That might be a 2-year program. That might be starting at a 2-year associate's program that eventually becomes a bachelor program. That might be going through the military or vocational programs. And so we just want to be clear that one, we very much acknowledge and support those other paths. And we are excited when we get to work with students who are using some of those alternative approaches. And so I think that's just important. I think it's really easy for us to get hyper focused on the 4-year bachelor's program, but there's so many other ways to get to a successful career and finding that profession that really suits you. Okay, for this next part, this is where I get to introduce my one of our new team members, Julia Ogden. So I am going to turn that over to you.
Hi, Laura. Thank you. Hi, everybody. It's nice to meet you. I'm going to spend a few slides talking through some of the numbers. When we really look back and dig a little more into the statistics of applications and admit rates at key schools over the last 10 to 15 years, some interesting trends emerge, and we want to share with you what some of that looks like. So on this first slide, before I dive into the numbers, I wanted to just tell you a little bit about how we've broken this out. So on the left side, the left graph is number of applicants at Texas schools. And so these are the larger Texas schools. These are the schools that we probably most often help Texas kids from our area apply to. So this is your UT, your A&M, Rice, Tech, Texas State, Baylor, TCU, SMU, all fantastic schools. On the right side is a graph of applicants from what you might have heard of as called the new or the public Ivies. And I wanted to take a second just to describe what those schools are and where that comes from. So as you probably know, there are 8 what are considered private Ivy League institutions, East Coast schools, highly selective schools that have been around for many, many years. What's happened in the last 10 to 15 years is this series of schools have come to light that are also highly academically rigorous, highly selective, but just aren't quite within that top 8 school ranking, as you might say. And some of those schools include University of Pennsylvania, Boston College, University of Michigan. Some of these are private, some of these are public. Now, you might ask, how do you know which schools are quote unquote public Ivies or new Ivies? And the answer is, it all just depends on who you ask. For example, there was an article released by Forbes just about 2 months ago, and it was a release of the new private Ivies, 10 new private Ivies and 10 new public Ivies that they were promoting and discussing in this particular article. You could find a different publication that listed a slightly different sequence of schools. However, the trends that you see within these schools are, number one, they're very academically rigorous. And number two, they do have admit statistics that indicate that they are highly selective. Many of these schools have become more and more popular among students because of a number of reasons, and we'll go into that a little bit more in a couple of slides. But these are great programs at a different price point than many of the Ivy League schools, and they're slightly larger and in some cases will provide more of a robust college experience. All that being said, I do want to also point out that 2 of the schools that are listed in our Texas graph, so the University of Texas and Rice, actually on many lists belong within the new/public Ivy category. However, there are Texas schools, and so out of Texas pride, we kept them with our Texas schools. So all that said, what you're seeing here in these particular graphs is, number one, the number of applicants that applied in 2015, and then in orange, the number of applicants from 2025. Very clearly a strong growth really across the board in number of applicants that are happening across all of these schools in all these demographics. You'll notice, though, that there are some where there's a more significant jump than in others. And speaking again to this new/public Ivy, those are the schools where you're going to see some of the more significant jumps in the number of applicants. Just to give you an example, there are a number of schools. University of Texas is one, University of Michigan is one, Vanderbilt is definitely one, where they have seen more than double the number of applicants in the 2025 cycle than they had just 10 years ago. There are, however, some schools where there is a jump, but it's not quite as significant as some of those more highly marketed schools. So maybe an SMU, Notre Dame, interestingly, has seen an increase, but not to the degree of some of the other institutions. So moving on to the next slide then, Laura. We are looking now at the by the numbers for 2010, 2015, and 2024. These are the admit rates. So instead of just looking at number of applicants, we're now looking at the percentage of students who are actually given acceptances by these different schools. Now, there's obviously a really strong correlation here between the schools where you saw big jumps in the number of applicants that correlates then to a decrease in the admit rate for that particular school. Great examples of that include, of course, UT, Rice, Vanderbilt, University of Pennsylvania. You'll notice certainly in the new public Ivy admit rates, there are a number of those schools over there where the admit rates are below or maybe just barely above 10%. And interestingly, just 20 years ago, those were admit rates of those 8 elite Ivy League schools. Now those are the rates of admittance that we're seeing at some of these new/public Ivies. I do want to talk also just for a few minutes about the University of Texas in particular. If you look at the graph, it's a little bit misleading. So the admit rate for 2024 that we have here is around 29%. However, as you probably know, the University of Texas by state law is now accepting all students within the Texas high school system who are within the top 6% of their class. Because of that, 75% of the incoming freshman class at the University of Texas is made up of these top 6%ers. And that only leaves then 25% of the freshman class that can then be reviewed by the admissions folks in order to actually assess whether those students are also really great fits for those programs. Needless to say, many of them would be fantastic fits. There just aren't that many seats left. One thing I will also clarify, if you have a student who's interested in the University of Texas and they are top 6%, keep in mind that that auto admit is really just into the School of Liberal Arts. So some of the more competitive majors and programs, for example, the business school or the engineering school, those students are not necessarily auto admitted into those particular programs. So they are also then going through that pool of being reviewed by those admission groups within those different schools. Moving on, one thing to keep in mind with those schools is, of course, they are, like every other institution at some level, a business. And part of what they have to do is figure out not only which students will be a good fit for their programs, they also have to figure out which students are most likely to accept their invitations to join. And so that's part of the balance and the payoff that you're seeing in some of those numbers as well. So the next slide is about what's driving these changes. Where is this coming from? There aren't that many more students than there were 20 years ago, and yet we're seeing these huge increases in the number of applicants. There are a number of reasons for that we're seeing. Number one is the ease of applying via the Common App. If you haven't been through a college application cycle yet, you may not have heard of it, but there is this application called the Common App. And the Common App was actually created back in the early 70s. Obviously, it's gone online now and is much more digital. And its purpose is to allow students to house all of their application information in one place and quickly and efficiently apply to multiple schools. That's really great for the student because then they're not having to recreate a full application every time they're going to apply to a school. It really just becomes a matter of paying the application fee and maybe writing 1 or 2 small supplemental essays to support their application. However, the flip side of that is that we're seeing a lot of students who in the past 5 to 10 years have started taking more of what you might call a shotgun approach to their colleges that they want to apply to, meaning it's less discerning about what school is perhaps really a great fit for them and more about, well, I saw this one on social media and it looked really fun, or my friend is going there too and it seems to be a really popular one and everybody says it's great, so I think, yeah, I need to apply there too. And what that's meant is that within the Common App, we have over 1,000 schools who are on the Common App. And in 2025, there were 8 million applications generated on the Common App. Just 10 years ago, in 2015, that was 3.4 million. So again, it's not necessarily there are that many more students. It's that all of these students are feeling this pressure to apply to more and more schools. Another piece that we're seeing is there's this migration of students in the Northeast and California to the Southern schools and even some of the Midwest schools. Part of that is political climate. Part of that might be relocation of families. Part of that might be social media promotion of some of these schools and their sports programs. All of those things are combining to be a factor to make these Southern schools and Midwestern schools much more attractive to these students who might have normally 20 years ago stayed within their home regions to go to college. What that really means for us is that the Texas students that we often serve are now competing with these great candidates out of the Northeast and California for the same limited number of spots at those schools. Another thing that we've seen change recently has been really the sophistication of college outreach. If you have a student maybe who's gone through the PSAT, you already know the amount of mail that starts showing up at your house after the PSAT is really pretty phenomenal. But in addition to that, these schools have gotten more and more advanced in how they're targeting students through social media and also through mailing applications and all the different touch points that they have now with students to be able to promote their programs. We did see ultimately in 2024 within certain regions of the country a spike in student high school graduation applications. And so while that's probably not going to be a sustained change, we know that we did have quite a bubble in 2024 of high school students who were graduating and applying to schools. The next bullet point is about this hyper interest in these new Ivies, the public Ivies and the SEC. Those schools are becoming more and more of a draw because they are seen as academically very worthwhile, while at the same time not carrying quite the same price tag as some of the Ivy League schools, and at least historically, maybe not quite as hard to get into as many of the Ivy League schools. And so more and more what we see students wanting to dip their toe into is, I want to see if I could get into some of these schools. I want to see if I would have a shot to perhaps attend one of them. That's a very common theme we hear among students. They just want to have those reach schools in their list to try to really go for. And finally, one thing we have seen is an increase in the number of international applicants, interestingly. Overall growth over the last several years in domestic numbers of students who are applying to college has hovered around 5%. And the number of students who are applying. Internationally, though, that's grown by 13% just in the last year. So that's becoming more and more of a piece of the application bubble as well. Our next slide is on what's the bottom line? What does this all really mean? The admit rates at the top 25 schools, if you were to look across the board at the 25 schools that are considered top tier schools, admit rates at all of those institutions is now under 10%. And interestingly, at 80 of the top schools, admit rates are now below 25%. So admit rates that used to really just be reserved for the top few schools in the nation have now kind of become the norm at many of these public and private institutions. 85 to 90% of the applicants meet the school's desired profile. It's not that these schools are getting pools and pools of students who are not great fits. That's not what's happening. Unfortunately, they have situations where they could potentially fill the number of applicants, fill their freshman class with applicants 2 to 3 times over with kids who would do great at their institution. They're simply having to get pickier and pickier and more selective on who they offer positions to in order to fill those seats with great students. We're also seeing a big trend recently, less predictability in what you might consider a safety school. This is some old terminology to some degree, but generally speaking, when students are applying to colleges, we tend to bucket the kinds of schools that they're applying to into something where they have high probability of getting into versus something that maybe isn't necessarily a sure thing for them versus something that's going to be a reach and you never know what their priorities are going to be and maybe it would work out. We really advise students to balance their school applications across schools that fit all of those particular categories so that they aren't left holding an empty bag with schools that were all potentially out of their reach from the beginning. The challenge we're seeing in these last 2 to 3 application cycles is that what used to be a safety is not necessarily a safety anymore. What used to be a target might now actually be a reach. And so we feel like the sand is moving under our feet a little bit in terms of what schools are going to be looking for and what their cutoffs are going to be and what some of their criteria is going to look like. It's all just become less predictable. And so we build that into our process of building the application with the student. The next bullet point is about institutional priorities. And what that means is each school has a number of priorities that they probably really don't publicize to the general student population, but that they're important on an internal level for that institution. And a great example of that is Baylor. Right now, Baylor, for the 2025 application cycle, men had a 6% advantage over women in applying to the University of Baylor. And that is because they are trying to balance out their gender division between men and women at the school. There are also other schools that might be looking, for example, for more first generation students that they want to have come to their university, or perhaps they're looking for certain rural students out of certain regions of the country. Those things are harder to predict, and some of them tend to shift year to year. But it's those little nuances of what's happening inside the walls of the institution of the university that are actually driving some of their admission decisions in the end. The other thing we've seen in this last cycle is more use of wait lists, deferrals, and these alternative start programs. So In the past, a deferral was kind of considered really a soft no. But what we're seeing now is that that's actually not the case. When there are this many applicants being considered for such a small group of positions within a university, the schools are having to use waitlists and deferrals in order to manage that queue of potential students. And so an example of that is University of Michigan actually deferred out-of-state students by default this last year, just to give themselves more time and to be able to hone in their process on how they wanted to review all of those students. And another example is Yale deferred 83% of their early applicants in this last application cycle. So in years past, waitlists and deferrals, they were a soft no, but they tended to not necessarily yield much change. What we've seen this year is that the waitlists are actually moving and that students are actually getting invited to these universities after being waitlisted. And so while that creates really great news for the families and for the students, this might have been an ideal school for this student. And so they could be thrilled. The challenge is some of those decisions now are getting pushed out further and further into the year. So in years past, we saw the application cycle really live within the window of December and April in order for decisions to be made. But now with these wait lists and deferrals, you're seeing that push out into May, June, sometimes even as late potentially as July. And I don't have to remind parents what kind of stresses that could then add in when you're trying to figure out where your student's going to live, who their roommate might be, and how you're going to manage the logistics of getting them all there. So it's an important shift. It's one we're trying to figure out how to help families manage, but it's encouraging that there is still some opportunity for students, even if they've been put on a wait list. And with that, I'm going to hand it back over to Laura
Yep.
and let her take back over from here.
Yep. I'm clicking all the buttons. Here we go. So as far as how do you take all of that information that Julie just shared and extract some insight out of it? And that's what we've done here of what does it mean for the class of 2026? So our soon to be seniors and underclassmen, right? And we've identified 4 things that we're going to go into more detail about here in just a moment. But those 4 things are academic readiness, demonstrated fit to major, highlighted fit to school, and authentic essays. And really, these 4 items should come together to create a very intentional, well-curated application. And you're going to hear us repeat quite a bit over the next slides, authentic, right? Really showcasing a value-driven, authentic application that showcases the student. And I think that's one of the big shifts that we're seeing as we move into this next application cycle. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Lisa.
Hi, everyone. I'm going to talk about the first component in an intentional, well-curated application, and that's academic readiness. And we've got 4 bullet points here. The first component of that is rigor. Those are the AP classes and the dual credit classes that your student's high school might offer. There's a progression of difficulty usually throughout high school, and particularly in the areas that they might be interested in college. So colleges are looking for rigor. If your high school offers AP and dual credit, then they're looking to see if the student took advantage of that. And especially the ones that are really interesting to them and that could help them potentially with a college major. So for example, if they want to go into chemistry, then they want to see that you've taken chemistry AP. So rigor is important as well. SAT and ACT test scores is another area. Both of those tests have gone through some recent revisions. The SAT is now digital and the ACT will be soon. They are now both a little shorter and giving students more time on each question. So that's good news. We really want to stress that it's important to have a good strategy and a good test plan so that those tests don't sneak up on you. And that you have really time to prep for those so that you can do your best work. I know some of you have probably heard some schools that are test optional, and there are some that are still test optional. But the trend that we're seeing, and especially in this last application cycle, is that schools are moving back to wanting those test scores. And here's why. They offer a common benchmark that a lot of the transcripts look the same. A lot of the kids have great grades. So what's the differentiator there? So they're looking at a test score to help them figure that out. It also helps us predict the colleges will help, it will help the colleges predict how well they'll do in college, how well they'll do on that campus when they have that score attached. So many are still saying test optional, but they're giving strong signals that submitting a good test score is beneficial. The next one is grades matter. We encourage, tell our students all the time, we need you to take your classes seriously. Grades do matter. Your GPA does matter. There's also a lot of grade inflation is going on, and that's happening in schools everywhere. That's when students are receiving higher grades for the same level of work that would have earned lower grades in the past. So with all of that grade inflation and the rigor and the SAT scores taken into consideration, um, we're always looking for another way that students can stand out. So the grade inflation is real, and it really kind of shifts the expectations. So students really have to try their best and get the help that they needed in class to make sure they have the strongest GPA that they can. And the last item under academic readiness is strong letters of recommendation. We always tell our students that at least 2 letters of recommendation are best, and we want them to choose teachers or other adults in their life that really know them best and maybe have even seen them grow over time. Those usually give the best story. Also, we encourage a teacher in a class that would align with your major. That's really helpful as well. And now I'm going to send it back to Laura to review some case studies about academic readiness.
Yeah, thank you so much. Okay, so we thought that we would talk about this in the theoretical, but also in the actual, right? By using some anonymized information from students from this class. And so we're going to go through 2 different students who were fantastic students, but also different in their interests and how they came to us in terms of how much they knew about the major that they wanted to study, the type of classes they were taking. And so their journeys looked very different, but both fantastic students. So Profile A was a student who applied to a variety of schools, right? So they applied to Auburn, but they also applied to competitive schools like Tulane and Wake Forest and UT, and actually ended up applying to the honors, one of the honors programs. And you can see that he got into a variety of schools, but also didn't get into some of those really competitive programs, even with these types of statistics, right? So this particular student was almost auto admit, 6.7%. Of the public high school that he attended. He had a very strong SAT, which going back to what Lisa said, as far as that test score does matter, even though schools are saying they're optional, it's really helping students to make a compelling argument of their academic readiness. This particular student also took a lot of AP classes, right? So he was very driven and was prepared and ready to take those classes, and so he enrolled in those, and so we were able to again show that academic rigor through this variety of AP classes. I want to say as well, the context of the school report does make a difference within the student assessment, right? So with a student at a public high school where they're offering a variety of APs, maybe 15 or more, right? That's looked at in terms of how many APs the student is applying to and what type of programs they're applying to. So those 11 AP classes within a public school that again had 15 or more, that tells a much different story than, let's say, a student who took one AP class at a school that had 15 or more. The student was also very involved in a variety of honor societies and had a variety of awards, academic awards, that he also received, and then also had some other interests like youth orchestra and chamber orchestra. So in terms of academic readiness, again, nearly, top of their class, strong SAT score, a variety of AP classes taken, a variety of honors and awards, and got into some great classes, but also didn't get into some of these, like what Julia mentioned, these public or new Ivy category, right? Because to her point, there are just so many students who are top of their class, lots of APs, all sorts of long resumes that are applying. And so it has become, we have to be more thought out about how are we telling their story of how those really high flyers are differentiating themselves. And I think that's a big difference that we've seen over the last 5 years. I can attest from students that I've worked with 5 years ago who would have had this similar resume and academic readiness, and we could have potentially had a different outcome at some of those schools where they didn't get in. Now, if we look at the profile of student B, this particular student was had different interests, right? So she came to us and didn't necessarily know exactly what major she wanted. She definitely was still in the discovery mode, but took a well-balanced list of classes. Didn't necessarily take all the APs or all dual credits. In fact, she just had one dual credit, and otherwise her other classes were grade level. And that was great too, right? So she knew what her strengths were, and she knew how to balance what she needed to have a balanced schedule. And that worked for her, right? So again, I think that comes back to being intentional, being well thought out, well curated, and knowing, yeah, you can enroll your kid in 11 AP classes, but are they going to actually be able to maintain those grades? Right? Because if they're going to enroll in those APs and end up getting B's or C's, that actually isn't going to be to their benefit. And that's one of the things we talk through with students is what's the right balance for you and what you're doing. This particular student went to a parochial school instead of a public school. They didn't provide any ranking. This student went test optional at any school that she could. She did have some leadership positions, so she was an officer in NHS, was also involved in Spanish Honor Society and some faith-based organizations. So she had some of that variety. But her academic readiness, just told a little bit different story. And so in terms of the schools that she was accepted to, Oklahoma, Charleston, Texas State, still fantastic schools. And then, didn't get the response that she wanted from Texas or UT or A&M. And so those were things that we talked about, right? And we had lots of conversations about knowing what we know and just the shifting environment of 2026. What was the probability and likelihood of these schools? And so she knew going into UT and A&M that those were going to be reaches, but she still wanted to go for them. And so I applauded her for putting her best effort there. Okay, I'm going to turn it back over to Lisa to talk about the second of those 4 items.
Okay, great. So our second component in an intentional, well-curated application is demonstrated fit to major. And this might be a new term to you, and it's new that colleges are using. And fit to major is talking about colleges want to see a relationship between the classes that your high school student takes and how those lead to a college major. So what they're taking in high school and what they're interested in, and how does that go along the path and feed into a major that interests them. So if they're thinking about business, then the college wants to see them taking business type classes in high school, electives, a strong math student, things that they would see as potentially academic ready for their business school. So fit to major is a new term. Clubs and extracurricular activities related to the major, that also demonstrates fit to major. So what kind of clubs are they in? What are they doing in extracurricular activities? And how do those align with their future goals? Colleges really are interested in how your high school student spends their high school time. Where are their values? Where are they spending any time they can? It kind of helps tell the story. Also, They're looking at what are kids doing in the summer? How are they spending their time? And how does that lead to more of their story and a future at their school? So summer programs, pre-college programs, that's another way for a student to engage on campus. There's several of those programs that happen over the summer. They do fill up quickly, so you need to be ahead of the game looking at those. But for example, here in San Antonio at UTSA, they've got summer programs for students who might be interested in architecture or engineering. So you might go to a camp for a week or so, and it kind of gives you a peek into that major and what that might be like in college. So those are great ways to demonstrate, again, your fit to major. We encourage informational interviews with professionals in the industry. Again, another way for students to get a peek into those fields. You might be able to set those up in just maybe an hour, maybe a little interview. Maybe you've got family friends or family members, or if your student is interested in pre-med, maybe your own doctors, maybe they would take time out to have a little interview with your student. And the student could ask questions of that professional. How did you get into this field? What's a typical day like? Those are all really good ways to, again, try to align and figure out what you might be interested in. And you never know, an informational interview could lead to my next point, which is shadowing. Um, Most professionals are open to maybe a half day shadowing, come and watch, spend a day in our office, spend a day in our clinic. And so we really encourage that. Which is another thing that you can put on your application. And again, it just shows that there's more interest, and there's students are really curious, and they're checking out those curiosities to see if it might be something for them. Internships are another way to show demonstrated fit to major. Those are a little harder with high school students, but we have found that they don't need to be a whole summer experience like what you think of a typical internship in college. They could just be maybe a week. Maybe we've seen some for 2 weeks. So again, another concentrated area where students can get a little real life experience, so that they can make some informed decisions. And the last thing that really demonstrates your fit to major, um, especially if you're looking into music, art, theater, dance, having personal projects or portfolios that showcase that creative work is also another way to really show the colleges what you've been doing in high school and how that will help lead to success on their campus. So I'll give it back to Laura for some examples.
Okay. All right, so diving back into the same two students, right? So profile A student, so just as a reminder, that was the public school student, lots of APs, high GPA. That particular student came to me knowing pretty well from the get-go that he was interested in government and political science, right? So we started off pretty quickly of, okay, what are options? What are programs to consider? Right. And so when we were looking at his resume and thinking about what he had already done, and then maybe what were some things to consider for the summer, our conversations were around where could you showcase this fit to major in government and political science. So some of the things that he did, he participated in a high school business program, which not necessarily directly related to government and political science, but great in terms of team building and leadership. And that's actually something that we talked about in some of his supplemental essays, was his experience with this business program. He also was nominated to go to Texas Boys State, right? And so obviously a very direct fit between government and political science. And that was something we talked about many times, and not only in his resume, but also in his supplements. He was an Eagle Scout. So lots of leadership and planning and different skills learned there. He was a sports team captain. In his essay, we actually talked about how his personal essay, how he liked to watch the State of the Union and read legislation just for fun, right? Again, just showcasing that fit to major. And then we even made references to the Constitution within his personal statement. So everything was very much in tune with this interest of government and political science and telling the story of how his activities and his interests very much fit to this major. He wasn't just, kind of picking a random major out of a list, but he had been very thoughtful about it. Now, again, with Profile B student, so she came to us much more in a discovery mode of kind of unsure, kind of your classic undecided, like, I think I may want to do this, but I'm not really sure. And so we had a lot of conversations about what were her natural strengths, what were her natural aptitudes and her passions, and then did some actual research of majors, which we're going to get into a little bit more later on. And we landed on communication, right? And in fact, she actually came to us saying, I think I want to go into business. And I said, well, tell me why. And let me also show you, the classes that are involved in business. And through that, she wasn't a lover of math. And in realizing that you had to take calculus and statistics, and there was quite a bit of math related to many of these business majors, which are more heavily financed, realized, you know what, that's actually not the right fit for me. And in fact, communication lends much better to my skill set. And so in her application, both in the resume, the supplemental essays, and the personal statement, we really leaned into her volunteering. So she was very involved at her church with a vacation Bible school. One of the topics that we used quite a bit was an experience she had as a volunteer soccer coach of some young kids, and that really had an impact on her. And having to communicate and lead, right, especially when it's across different ages. She also was a law firm summer intern. So that was something, again, as we were trying to discover what her interests were, she had an opportunity through her family to intern at the law firm and see, well, maybe law, right? Communication could lend itself to law. And she's still very open to possibly that future as a grad program. But that was great, right? Being able to see, does this fit me? Does it not? Do I have an immediate, like, absolutely not? Or am I still open to it after I do this type of internship or shadowing? She also had her own Etsy business, and then also in her essay, shared these really sweet childhood stories about how she overcame and how she was determined, and how that really was this thread that connected a lot of her experiences where she had to overcome adversity and find her voice. And so all of these things, again, figuring out how do they relate to communication, spending time with her, understanding what does the communication major look like, so then we could hone in her list of activities and her essays accordingly. And I just wanted to add as well to Lisa's point as far as this fit to major aspect. You might be hearing, oh my gosh, how do I fit in internships and summer programs and all these different things now, right? I think one of the big things that we're really moving to within our practice is really encouraging parents and students to use summer in a more thoughtful way. Obviously, summer is a great time to rest, and yes, we want you to rest and recharge, but especially for those students who are looking to apply to those public Ivies and want to really be competitive for the Dukes and the UNCs and the UCLAs and the USCs. Like, really, we need to be thinking about how we're using the summer, whether that's through pre-college programs, whether that's through volunteering or finding that activity or starting that activity that really interests you. Summer is a really great time to get a head start on that, and then to continue to build on that experience throughout your school year, right? So that you're getting even more experience as years goes on. Maybe you start as an entry-level volunteer with some nonprofit that you really enjoy, and by the next summer, now you have more of a leadership position, right? And you get to show that arc of growth. So I just wanted to point that out. All right, I'm going to turn it over to Lisa to go through the third item.
Okay, great. And our third component of being very intentional is our highlighted fit to school. We're really encouraging our students to not just apply randomly to schools, but really be knowledgeable about the schools that you are interested in. And to do that, we want our students to be really knowledgeable on the specific programs that those colleges offer. And so one way to do that is to review the program degree plans, which are on all of the college websites. And so that really is nice because it kind of lays out the required classes that you might take, what you might take freshman year versus sophomore year versus junior year. And so students can look at that, like Laura just said, and, does that sound like me? Ooh, I don't like that. I need more English, those kinds of things. So we really encourage them to spend time on the college websites, kind of digging into those degrees. Um, Also, reaching out to professors or department chairs for further information. If you have a specific question that you can't find on the website or a program that maybe you've heard about, but you can't find the information, usually their emails are right there and it doesn't hurt just to send them a quick chat. That's also great networking. And so you can get a little more information for you. Um, Also, um, another way to be really knowledgeable on the university is to do a school visit, and even virtual counts. You can't possibly hit all the schools maybe that you want to look at. There's not enough time or money to travel to all of them. School visits in person are a wonderful opportunity if you can. It gives you a real vibe and you get to ask a lot of questions and see things. But virtual is great too. They've gotten really expert in their virtual tours, give you a lot of great information, and it can give you a peek into what that might look like, especially a big school versus a small school. So we really encourage visits, whether in person or virtual. Also, digging for those unique opportunities and programs offered. We're seeing more and more universities offer some really cool things. Data analytics is becoming more and more popular. There's all kinds of different health programs. So if you're pre-med, it doesn't have to be just biology and chemistry anymore. Um, so there's lots of different avenues that can help you see if this school is really a good fit for you. Um, One more thing on the tours. It's really important on the tours to take really good notes and notate the people that you interacted with, any maybe someone that you interacted with, any of the programs or clubs that really excited you or caught your eye, because those are good to use in the supplemental essays as well. And then your unique opportunities. The other one that's really unique is communication leadership. That's a new one that we see also that might engage your student. So all of these are, again, being intentional. It's not just like Julia said, oh, my friend's going to apply, so I think I will too. We really encourage our students to spend some time and really diving in and looking at what they offer and getting some specifics, because that can really help tell your story through your essays. And I'll send it back to Laura for some examples.
Great. Okay, so as far as the two students we've been talking about and how they showcased their fit to school, so with student A, with that fit to school, it tends to come through, and I know Lisa just mentioned this, it tends to really come through the supplemental essays, right? That's when you really get an opportunity because those supplemental essays are only going to that particular school. It's different than the personal statement, where if you're using Common App, your personal statement is going to go to every school that you apply to, but the supplemental essays are just going to that school. So it's a great opportunity to talk directly to them. So for that Profile A student, again, interested in history, political science, government, they mentioned those school-specific student political groups that they were a part of, right? They talked about, like I mentioned before, that Boys State experience and getting to create laws and having to convince others to vote on legislation and understanding that whole process. They mentioned names of particular programs at the school that related to his interest. So one of the things that we start doing over the summer before senior year when we're creating their application and building the supplemental essays is doing research. And to Lisa's point, if you go and do a campus tour, you do a virtual webinar, and you've kept really fabulous notes, that part gets really easy, because when I ask, all right, why did you like this school? Why are we choosing this school? And you can pull up your notes and say, oh, it's because I had this conversation with such and such, and I found out that I really liked this major, and I just feel like it really fits. And I had this great experience when I went to the student union, and so on and so forth, right? So those notes do come into play. Mentioning school-specific capstone projects required for the major, that was something that the student talked about. Again, just showing he had done his research. He had gone well past the landing page for a university and had really dug in. And then interactions with the tour guide on his college tour. In terms of Profile B student who was applying to communication programs at larger universities, she also mentioned school-specific programs in each of the supplement. Again, we worked together to research the different programs she was interested in, going beyond just I'm interested in a communication major, but really looking to see what type of offerings do they have? Are internships built into their communication major? Do they get to, is it project-based learning? Is it just lecture? What might work for you better? For one of the schools that she was applying to, there was a religious supplemental essay question, which sometimes you'll find. Pepperdine is a great example of a school that asks for a faith response, or a faith statement as one of their supplemental essays. And so she discussed her faith and her desire to lean into faith, right? And so again, that's where they really demonstrated that fit to school aspect of their application. All right, Lisa's going to share on our final fourth item.
Okay, and we'll move quickly as I know our time is drawing near. So our final component to create an intentional, well-curated application is the essay, an authentic essay. And a lot of times the essay is what scares students, but we take an approach of telling your story. That this is a perfect time to share the information that can't be found in other parts of your application. A lot of the application is numbers and your GPA, your SAT, the classes that you've taken. And so this is the perfect place to reveal your character, your values, your unique voice. So admissions offers can get a really good idea and really get to know you and your personality here as well. A resume is usually past focused, but the essay is very present and future focused. So really being authentic in that place is to your benefit. The admissions officer doesn't have a lot of time to read the essay, as you can imagine, with the number of applicants that are coming in. So we really help students try to curate a story that really describes them. And we try to stay away from the ordinary stories like the bad grade I got, the sports game that I lost. And we really try to dig a little deeper and do a lot of self-reflection. And so we spend a lot of time brainstorming and talking with students. Also in the essay is a great time to highlight how you will engage in that college community. The college wants to know why you like them and how you think you'll fit in here. And so we like to tell your story and shine and have your students shine in that way. A lot of times we will ask a student to kind of take a magnifying glass to an experience, an event, or a moment they've had, and really try to elaborate their essay around one of those items that kind of ties their whole story together. So we spend a lot of time in this area really trying to get to the heart of the student. And I'll pass it back to Laura.
Yeah, so for this final one, we didn't do a separate slide, but we just wanted to share a few points from again, how each of those students, Profile A and Profile B, approach their personal statement. And like we had already mentioned in some of the other slides, so Profile A, his personal statement, again, brought in that piece of the US Constitution, nerded out about some legislation, right? Again, to show his interest in government and politics, but also took that opportunity to bring in some of the other interests like orchestra and Eagle Scouts and how he was involved. And so we found that right balance between his ability to nerd out on that topic while also showcasing some of the other leadership and opportunities that he had. Profile B student. So she wrote this fantastic story about an experience she had in elementary school, a very sweet competition for elementary kids that she ended up winning, but had to work really hard for. And then parlayed that into other experiences she had as far as having to overcome other adversities that came into her life, right? It wasn't super intense. It was actually very sweet and fun, and it kind of had a little bit of whimsy in it, but that was very much her, right? And so it was very fitting of her voice and her personality. And so I really felt like for both of those students, you got a sense of who they were just from that essay that they submitted. One of the things that we're about to start the essay process with many of our students for our rising seniors, and the thing that we repeat to them all the time is think of it like an interview, right? So you have your quantitative data of your GPA and your test scores, and then your resume, which is kind of your laundry list of your activities. But your personal statement and your supplemental essays are really your way to kind of sit in front of the admissions officer and show them who you are, right? What's important to you? Are you funny? Are you sarcastic? Are you more serious? Are you empathetic and really thoughtful? Are you deep, right? Whatever that might be for your student. And the thing that I always tell students, and I think Lisa might have touched on this, is if somebody picked up your essay, a close friend or a parent or a family member, and they read your essay and your name wasn't on there, could they immediately identify that you wrote this, that your student wrote this? If the answer is yes, then you've nailed it in terms of authenticity, right? If the answer is no, and a lot of times what this looks like when it's a no is it reads like something a student thinks an admissions officer wants to hear. It just feels clunky and weird and awkward a little bit, and like, okay, you're just trying to, kind of repeat the resume over again. We want to see that authenticity, whatever that might be. And so I think spending time with your student, again, that reflection and that self-awareness, starting to talk about that and build those questions and that thoughtfulness in early is going to help when they get to the personal statement writing portion, because they've already been having that reflection time with themselves of what is important to me, who is the type of person, how do I present, what has defined my success, or what have been some failures that have really grown me. So those are some things that have been really important with the essay. Okay, to wrap it up, we're going to zoom through the last couple slides. So what if my student doesn't know, right? So first off, if you're a parent listening to this and you're like, oh my gosh, my kid does not know this, they're still operating in 2020 or 2015 thinking they can just send in an application and get in. Well, first off, we just want to say you're not alone. This has definitely shifted every year. I feel like it's continues to be these seismic shifts in terms of expectations. And so part of the reason we wanted to share this webinar and host this webinar was to update you, right? So that you're not caught off guard. So you can start these conversations now, whether you have a junior, a sophomore, or a freshman, or even an eighth grader. Review the high school classes that your student is taking, right? Maybe they need to up their rigor a little bit. Maybe they're coasting too much and they need to consider an AP or dual credit, or maybe they're taking too many and you know that it's going to be too much and they're going to struggle to juggle all the things that they have going on in the classroom and outside. And so maybe we need to dial it back a little bit, but really think about why we're taking the classes we're taking and does it align with the major of interest. There's some really fabulous online resources. One of them is College Board Big Future. So College Board, the same people who write the SAT and AP tests, they have a website called Big Future. You can research schools, you can research careers. We would encourage you to check that out and start to do a little digging with your student. US Labor and Statistics, they also have a lot of data as far as what careers are out there, what are the ones that are on the rise in terms of need. Like many government-based websites, it can feel a little bit overwhelming at first. But as you dig into it, again, there's lots of great info. The Common App. So the Common App as well has a tool where you can research schools and research majors and careers. So the same website where they might eventually apply also has some tools to explore career interests. Aptitude assessments. This is a big one. So there's lots of different aptitudes out there, aptitude testing, U-Science, the Ames test, Highlands assessment. We've recently switched over to Clifton Strengths. It's a well used across industries. And we have a fabulous consultant who this is all her and her team do. And they put together these amazing reports that really get into what are the students' natural gifts and passions. But whatever you use, whether it's Clifton Strengths or something else, we would encourage you to use one of them, right? To start to put some words around what are your students' natural strengths? I think sometimes it can be really hard to figure out what that is. And so having some data-driven information there is really helpful. Review college degree plans. Lisa touched on this, but they're quite easy to find. You can Google University of Texas engineering degree plan or biology degree plan, and you can find them, and it really helps to see what are the actual classes that would be required to take. Like I shared, I had a student B who came in and said they wanted to do business, and after we looked at the degree plan, she realized, oh no, I don't want to take that much math, right? And we had to pivot. That would have really impacted what schools she applied to and her ability to get in, because business is a very selective major. So that is important. And then lastly, informational interviews. We touched on that already, but really encouraging your student to set up some of those. So the good news, right? So first off, all of our students from this last class, the students who are getting ready to graduate, they all got multiple offers from multiple schools. So we just want to encourage you, there is absolutely a school for your student. We want to be really mindful that you don't walk away from this webinar being like, oh my gosh, my kid's not going to get into college. What are we going to do? That's not at all the case. But instead of falling into that more fear-driven mentality, we really want to encourage you to be thoughtful and value-driven. We took this quotation from a fellow college advising company out of Austin who we really admire, and College Matchpoint, and they said, let values, not panic or prestige, drive your family's approach. And we couldn't agree with that more, right? Of really letting the students' values and what they want out of their college experience, what they want out of their career, let that be the driver. Don't take, like Julia said, that shotgun approach of we're just going to apply to 20 schools because Laura said that it's super unpredictable and we don't know. Do the research on the schools, figure out what fits your students best, and apply to schools that match that. And then lastly, applications need to showcase who your student is with intentionality and authenticity. Again, I said earlier we were going to repeat that authenticity word quite a bit, and it couldn't be more truer, right? I think gone are the days where you can just kind of make up a story and say, yeah, I'm interested in business, but haven't actually participated in any incubators or done any business programs or shadowed any students in or any professionals in business, but really showing what have you done, right? It doesn't necessarily have to be a big glamorous internship as a 16-year-old. It could be just having a summer job, right? And learning, oh, wow, okay, like there's actually marketing and strategy that goes into even this small or medium-sized business. So showcasing that your student is being intentional, you're thinking about what do I want my college experience to be? And lastly, just to wrap it up, if you want to get in touch with us to talk about anything that we've discussed during our webinar, you can call or text. You can also send us an email, and then we have a lovely website. We are going to post this recording, so we will email that out if you want to share it with any family or friends who you feel like it would be helpful for them to listen to. We greatly appreciate that. This is just going to be the first of hopefully many webinars. And so please stay in touch with us so that you'll know when the future ones happen. But with that, unless we have any questions, we will let you all go enjoy your, I think it's Tuesday evening. Do we have any questions just before I sign off?
Nope, no questions.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for signing in. We really appreciate your time, and we will hopefully see you soon. Have a great week.